The Bible doesn't say anything about the United States of America. I mean, not literally. Nowhere in there does it say, and the U.S. does this, and America does that. Of course, that doesn't stop people from wondering. And I remember years ago, pastor I was under then, Presbyterian pastor, talking about this. He was a real super patriot and saying, hey, I don't see the United States in the book of Revelation. So, spoiler alert, number one reason maybe we're not in there is because we're not here. We're gone. We have disappeared. Not just us in the rapture, but I mean the country's gone out of the picture. That's why it's not mentioned. That is one scenario. But let's take a look at the other possibilities in your bulletin. When I first started looking at it, I thought, man, Charlie, you messed up. You got these all out of order. And then I read that little part that says, rank from least likely to most likely. So let's start with number 6, the least likely explanation for the United States in the book of Revelation at this time when all this stuff's happening. And that is, she's the obscure young lions. Which goes in your blank. Ezekiel 38. Everybody remembers Ezekiel 38, right?
Yeah.
No? Yeah, me neither. So it says here, talking about this time, way back there in Ezekiel's time, Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish. Now, what's Tarshish? Charlie asked possibly Spain, but in my research and study for this sermon, there are a whole bunch of people out there that are trying to make the argument that, and it's a credible argument, that Tarshish referred to sort of everything north of the Mediterranean, north and west, which the first thing is Spain. But in fact, it literally means beyond Gibraltar. But if you go further beyond Gibraltar, what do you get? Great Britain. And there's a lot of people out there that say it's not necessarily Spain, it could be Great Britain. And they hang their hat on that one. They say it's Great Britain. And that leads us to the next part of this verse when it says, all their young lions. Well, who are their young lions? Well, if it's Spain, that would just be other cities in Spain. And basically what they're doing here is they're just kind of challenging this Antichrist and what's happening and saying, what are you up to? What are you going to do? But their argument, those who support this view, is that no, it's Great Britain. And Great Britain's young lions are its colonies, its offshoots, the United States, Australia, but most particularly the United States. So that's their argument, is that that's it. We're those young lions. We're going to be there underneath the umbrella of Great Britain as part of the British Empire, sort of, culturally at least. And we'll be in there challenging the Antichrist. Part of what's, if that, as it says here, that's number 6, least likely explanation. Adding to the least likeliness of it are things that are happening lately. Brexit. England's pulling out of the European Common Union. So it doesn't seem to be going that way. There's another, perhaps more relevant, significant fact, which is the Islamization of Great Britain. This ended up not happening, but before the Olympics in England, remember that? A few summers back. The Muslim church, or whatever it is in England, had gotten permits and plans to build the biggest mosque in the world. And they were going to build it right next to that famous bank in England. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Looks like an enormous egg, beautiful egg. It's become the monument in London. They want to put it right next to it, so that when the Olympics were there, it would be a symbol of the world that, look, we're taking over England. And they kind of are. Sharia law is being adopted all over England in certain communities and stuff like that. So that would maybe create, throw some cold water on the idea that England's going to be in there opposing the Antichrist, especially given Charlie's sermon from a few weeks back, when it sounds like the 12th Imam is looking a lot like the Antichrist. Now, what's interesting, just again, coincidentally or whatever, God's spirit, grace, about 15, 20 years ago, we were doing a project at school, teachers in service, and we were doing a PowerPoint, and I don't remember exactly why we were doing it, particularly what we were doing, but we were asked to speculate on where we thought the world would be, I think it was 20 years in the future. And back then, I said, based on stuff I was looking at geopolitically at the time, I said, I see the world being divided into 3 cultures. There's going to be 3 predominant cultures, and not just cultures, but geographies, 3 geographical regions that will be the world of that future, which isn't too far away. Basically, about a third or half the world, what would be China? I figured China was going to take over Russia, which can still happen. And it would control the entire East, which could also happen, and Russia. And then I figured I could be even more wrong about this, but I saw the Americas kind of coming together, North and South America. One big economic trading area, kind of like the European Common Union. And the third one would be Greater Islam, which I saw Islam controlling all of Europe and Eastern Europe and the Middle East and Africa. And, that's also possible. So that, again, pushes Britain out of the picture if that were to actually happen. So, enough about number 6. Let's move on to number 5. She's the equally obscure eagle of Revelation 12, 13, and 14. You guys remember that one?
Yeah.
Do you? Yeah. Okay, let me read it for you. It says, and when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place where she was nourished for a time and times and a half a time, which is 3.5 years, away from the presence of the serpent Satan. So in that view, that's us. And where they get that from is Britain's symbol is a lion. And this creature is a lion with eagle's wings. And so the idea there is, we're the eagle, it's the American symbol, we have the eagle for our symbol. So that must be us. We must come in there and help Israel survive. And but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot. That's a lot of reaching. Some symbols that John saw, the American eagle, and it just takes a whole lot of spiritualizing and not a whole lot of support for that one. It's out there, but which interestingly, when you look at all these, I looked them all up. It's kind of like everything else. When you read one person's view and they lay out all their scriptures, you're like, oh yeah, that could be. And then you read the next guy, like, oh no, that's completely different. So they all have some scripture to base it on, but a lot of speculation. Okay, so let's cross that one out. Now this one, number 4, I found over and over and over again. There's a lot of folks grabbing onto this one, and this one is the worst for the United States in the sense that we're the bad guy. We are Babylon in this view. That's what goes in your mind. We're Babylon. We're not some side player. We're not some incidental or out of the picture. We are it. We are the Antichrist society and kingdom. Now, where do they get this from? They refer to this verse in Revelation that talk about where Babylon comes from. And it says it rises out of the sea, which in previous weeks Charlie's talked about, what the sea means, and it doesn't necessarily mean the sea. And what they all argue is The sea just means some remote place where there aren't any people now. And their important part of their argument is that at the time that this is written, there was no Americas. Nobody knew it existed. And so all the countries they specifically name and identify are over there, that half of the earth. And that they argue that this Babylon is going to rise up from this mostly unpopulated area at their time, which would be the Americas. And there's a lot of things about the description of that beast that fits America. Wealthy, prosperous, trade, big trade, trades with everybody, the whole world depends on its economy. That sounds pretty familiar. So, there's some credibility to that. The verse that Charlie included in the bulletin here says, Revelation 18:17 through 19. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, "What is like this great city?" Now, critics of this view would say, it's not a city. The United States is way more than a city. But again, there's multiple references in the Bible where city doesn't mean a specific city. It means a culture, a place, a people, a nation. So that's not necessarily a disqualifier. And this is describing what ultimately happens to that city, that culture, that whoever that is. They threw dust on their heads, this is everyone else, the survivors, and cried out, weeping and wailing and saying, "Alas, alas, that great city, in which all who had ships in the sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she was made desolate." Which is a scary, somber possibility for whoever that is. But a lot of, as Charlie said, there are liberal churches grab onto that. Oh yeah, America and Babylon, we're evil. And the irony is, the way they see us as evil is in the economic prosperity and the wealth and the capitalism and all that. They completely ignore all the moral stuff, which we'll get to a few points down. All right, so there's that one. America is Babylon. Number 3, she's still here, just insignificant to world, Middle East, and Israeli history. Unless America goes away way before all this happens. It's hard to see that, at least at this point. We're the major player in the world, obviously. So anything that happens in Israel, we would be involved in, care about, have some role in. So that one's hard to see, but it could happen, which kind of ties into point number 1, which we'll get to in a minute. Number 2, she's part of the revived Roman Empire, one of the 10 toes of Daniel 2. And Daniel 2 is the chapter that talks about the statue. Remember that? The head and all the, I can't remember all the parts. And the bottom line is there's these feet with 10 toes. And the argument is, that's it. We're one of those 10 toes. And in fact, when I get in my research, you can go on the web and see all kinds of websites where they have various lists of 10 countries, 10 cultures, 10 groups of countries. Of course, they're always changing, depending on how the world changes. And in one of those, interestingly, again, if you look at what's happening now, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Club of Rome. Anybody? Yeah, I've heard of it. So I hope this isn't like some weird cult thing or conspiracy theory. But here's what's interesting about the Club of Rome. This was 10 nations that got together in 1968 and basically said, remember, 60s, turmoil, Vietnam War, Cold War, things were looking really bad. These 10 countries got together and said, we're going to organize the whole world. We have a plan to organize the whole world into 10 regions that, once it's organized, and we'll deal with these 10 regions. Of course, this is a one world government idea ultimately. We'll set up this one world government through the United Nations. We'll divide the world into 10 regions, And it was just kind of an interesting coincidence that it's 10 regions organizing the entire world into these 10 regions. The problem with that one is the toe that we were supposed to be part of was Britain again. Now, someone would change that to, no, Britain's out. The toe we're going to be part of is the North American, South American, or just the North American, I guess. Canada, the United States, and Mexico. We're going to be one of those 10 toes, and that's their argument. Again, the way things are going, alliances shifting and changing. All their 10 is kind of breaking up and falling apart, so they're losing faith in that one. Which brings us to number 1. She ends up imploding or exploding before the end. Back to number 3. And that's more possible than you think, I'm afraid. Romans 1:24, talking about, therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness. Uncleanness, what does that mean? Committing all kinds of sins that we're not supposed to do. And the next verse, Romans 1:26, for this reason God gave them up to vile passions. None of that going around in the United States. Yes, there is. Even as they did not like to retain God, Romans 1:28 says, even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting. And boy, does that hit home. We don't want to hear about God. We talked about that in the Bible studies. We don't want to be told hard things like there's a hell, or that God judges, or that certain things are wrong that we say, no, it's okay. Don't want to hear it. And as we reject God, God says, okay, go your own way. And I shared this in the Thursday night Bible study. What we humans tend to think is our choice is between God being the God of our lives or us being the God of our lives. That's what we think the choice is. But that's not it. The only choice is God's going to be the God of your life or Satan is going to be the God of your life. When you reject God, you're joining Satan's club, which of course that's Satan's doing. He wants you to. What did he tell Adam and Eve? Eat that fruit. You'll be God. You don't need him. You'll be God. And when they ate the fruit, what did they become? His. And that's all of us. That's the human condition. You don't have a choice between your way versus God's way versus the devil's way. It's God or the devil. That's your choice. And when you reject God, you're joining Satan's club. Whether you realize it or not. Remember, he's an angel of light. He appears to us as beautiful and kind and understanding and on our side. He's a great deceiver. And of course, that's not true. And so we see the United States increasingly going that route. In fact, what really intrigues me, and again, evidence of this is there's been a huge discussion all of a sudden lately about protecting religious freedom, religious rights. And the reason it's interesting to me is, for most of the last 50 years, where's been the respect and the reverence and the cherishing and protecting of Judeo-Christian rights? There hasn't been any. Prayer, kicked out of schools. Then you can't pray here, you can't pray there. There's a cross over there, I can see it, you got to take it down. Nothing but repression of Christianity for the last 50 years at least. And all of a sudden, Islam gets special protection when it comes to religious freedom. Don't you dare say a word about them. Me saying what I'm saying right now, I could be arrested one of these days. Islamophobia. You can't say that. You can't say anything bad about them. And it's not personal, I'm just talking about their theology. Charlie talks about their theology, but it's in their books, it's in their writings, it's in their practices. And that somehow Gotta be protected. Not us, not you, the Catholic Church. I'm no big defender of the Catholic Church, but I point out to my students, they're going to be like Peter. All my Catholic students have a largely Hispanic student body, and most of them are Catholic. Not very good ones, they would say. Pretty weak, I agree. But when they go to college, you can't say this about this group or this group or this group or this group, but boy, you can say anything you want about the Catholic Church. Open season. Where's the respect for religious freedom? And not saying anything bad about religious people. It doesn't exist. It's one-sided. And that reveals what's really going on here. This is a spiritual thing that's going on in our universities and colleges. And the broader culture. Hollywood. You know, they're the most vocal, outspoken, constantly doing TV shows and movies about how terrible, evil Christians say bad things about Islam, want to restrict it. And what's really amazing about that, it's the only religion that, to this day, is very upfront about their positions about things Hollywood really cares about, like gay rights. And the Sharia countries of the Middle East, they kill homosexuals. They throw them off the roofs of buildings or tip walls over on top of them. They execute them. That's the penalty. The president of Iran visited Columbia University. And they asked him about that, the students. They said, hey, what about how you treat gay people? He goes, what are you talking about? There are no gay people in Iran. Yeah, because they're either dead or they don't talk about it. And so, yeah, there's no gay people in Iran. And women's rights. Saudi Arabia is like international news. They're letting women drive cars as of about a week or two ago. And that's news, because normally they don't, and women have no rights, and it's part of their religion. And Hollywood doesn't seem to see a problem with that. So yeah, it points to us that it's really a spiritual battle. So Romans 1:28-32 says this. I went back a little further. 1:32. I want to give you the context. Since they did not see fit to acknowledge God as their creator, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do things which are improper and repulsive, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice, and mean-spiritedness, gossip, spreading rumors. Sounding familiar? Slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of new forms of evil, disobedient and disrespectful to parents without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful, without pity. Although they know God's righteous decree and his judgment, that those who do such things deserve death, they not only do them, but they even enthusiastically approve and tolerate others who practice them. And that's where we're headed. Not to mention, as he points out here, the impact of the rapture. Once the rapture happens, there's no restraint. Throughout human history, God has restrained us. He's never really let us be as evil as we would like to be or as we're capable of being. He's restrained us. That restraint gets lifted. And so if that makes things even worse. And then finally here he has something I've heard before. The Cycle of Empires. Alexander Tyler, 1787, said a democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government, which is why our founding fathers understood that, the limits of democracy, the dangers of democracy, which pure democracy is mob rule. Whatever the majority wants, they get, the minority gets nothing. Republic gives minority rights. But the idea of rights is based on God. There has to be a God, there has to be a Bible, there has to be a reference that you can reference. What is right, what's wrong, how do we know? What's our moral compass? You throw that out, you don't have a moral compass. So we were set up as a republic, which puts some limits on democracy. It can only exist, here's the key, because boy, is this happening now. And just driving down here this morning, they were talking about this new super popular young Latina representative in New York that was out with Bernie in Kansas yesterday. She's such a shoo-in in her district to win the election. They haven't even had it yet. She hasn't been elected representative of that district. She's just the Democrat nominee, which means she's going to get it because no Republican has a chance in that district. But she's out with Bernie in Kansas. She's doing the celebrity tour. And she's promoting what got her elected to be the Democrat nominee, which is free stuff for everybody. Free health care, guaranteed minimum income, free college, all this free stuff. And the problem with that, of course, is, as it says here, it can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves money from the public treasury. And we've been doing that for a while now, but it's becoming more blatant, more open. As Margaret Thatcher put it most eloquently, the problem with socialism is, sooner or later, you run out of other people's money. And that's absolutely true. Socialism in modern times can appear to work for a while. Ask Venezuela. Works pretty good at first. You're giving away all this free stuff because you're spending the money that the free society created, the wealth of the free society. You just take all that wealth and you spend it, but you run out pretty quickly, as Venezuela has now. And then people are waiting in line to get toilet paper and eating dogs and cats because that's where it ends up. But that's what Tyler said would happen inevitably. I think de Tocqueville might have said the same thing. And so he's got this little this sequence here. You go from bondage to spiritual faith, and as in that case, spiritual faith. I don't know how many of you know this, but the American Revolution was prompted primarily by a revival. It was called the First Great Awakening. In fact, I was just reading something this weekend where they said, even if none of the founding fathers, Adams and Madison and Washington, none of those guys had been around, our Constitution would have come out the way it did, and the revolution would have taken place because of the pastors. The pastors in America rediscovered the Bible during that time and started preaching the word, and calling people back to real faith. And it was their religious faith that caused them to challenge the system that they felt was going against the Bible. It's called the Black Robe Brigade, because preachers wore black robes in those days. So they got the spiritual faith. That led to great courage. From courage, their courage led to their liberty, their freedom. They were independent. They were set free. That freedom of enterprise and commerce led to abundance. But then abundance, ironically, leads to selfishness. When you got a lot of stuff, you just want more. And you tend to get real tight with it about sharing. Then from selfishness, you go to complacency. From complacency to apathy, you just don't care, partly because you give up. From apathy to dependency. That's kind of where we are now. Take care of us, government. Give us stuff. We'll give up our rights in exchange for you taking care of us. Security. Benjamin Franklin famously said, a society that trades rights and freedom for protection, for security, will have neither. Which, of course, is true. You go down that road, government's your friend. Government's here to help until they own you. And then your freedom goes away. I got a point here too, real quickly, to wrap this up. The Jews did the same thing. They went through this cycle. Remember that? Remember those folks?
Yeah.
Moses led them out. They had great faith. They had great courage. They wandered in the wilderness. They ended up going to Israel, taking the promised land. Had everything going their way. Had prosperity and abundance in their own country. And what did they do? What us humans tend to do. We want someone to take care of us. We want a king like all the other countries have, to fight our battles for us, to represent us, to lead us, to tell us what to do. And yeah, we'll give up a little bit of freedom. And God warned them, no, you don't want this. but they took it. And of course, where did it lead? Well, you had David and Solomon, but then you had all bad after that. And that's kind of where we are. Apathy to dependency, and blasphemy, of course. From dependency back into bondage. You lose all your rights, you become slaves. And just one last real quick thing. A book I've been recommending to everybody, Suicide of the West by John Goldberg. He talks about this, how we trade away our freedom and our system for security. And of course, as Franklin warned us, we end up with neither. And we really seem to be going down that road. So maybe that's why we're not in there. We're not around. We don't matter. So on that cheery note, let's close in prayer.